Despite the recent milestones of making sign language the 12th official language, there are concerns it will not promote inclusivity. President Cyril Ramaphosa signed the sign language bill into law earlier this week, and the move, which has taken years to reach, has been welcomed. However, more still needs to be done to ensure the deaf community enjoys inclusivity and equal opportunities. We join now by Professor Theodorus du Plessis from the Department of South African Sign Language and Deaf Studies at the University of the Free State. Prof, thanks so much for joining us. Just your reaction initially, albeit that this has been a lengthy and cumbersome process to bring us here now where the sign language has been enacted or ratified as an official language. Your view?
Yeah, well, it's not really that long. The campaign initially started in '94 when the National Council of the Deaf has first asked for the language to be officialized. The ANC made the first proposal to the Constitutional Assembly in 1995. And in 1996, the language was actually officialized in schools, as you know. And it was also included in the institution as part of a group of languages under the mandate of the Pan-South African Language Board. Plus, human linguistic rights were awarded to all citizens, including the deaf. So that went fairly quickly. From 2007, when the deaf community again tried, and this time the correct procedure through the Constitutional Review Committee, it took a little bit longer, up to 23, but that process was delayed by several things, one of them being uncertainty on how to handle the actual amendment. Which committee was responsible to do that. There were doubts about the fact that there's no standard sign language. What about that? Usually a standard language is officialized. And finally, it took a while to get it. Actually, it took 3 parliaments to get it to 2020 when Cabinet approved it. So it went all fairly relatively quickly, but it depends how you look at it.
I suppose it depends on your perspective, Prof. But what we want to know now, if I'm reading you well, you're saying this was a mere formality because there had been groundwork being done to make sure that sign language is included as an official South African language. And while we're excited about it, but what does it mean in terms of the rolling out and ensuring that there is inclusivity of the deaf community and access to information primarily?
Yeah, very good question. Look, obviously, by writing it down as an official language by itself doesn't create inclusivity. We know that. We have the situation since 1993, actually in 96, with 9 Sintu languages, Zulu, Sotho, and so forth, being officialized. Question is, how far did we proceed with them being official languages in terms of inclusivity? But what we've done in South Africa, we've chosen the route of inclusivity through multilingualism. Now, the Use of Official Languages Act requires the state to function, and that's the primary agent in this process, to function in at least 3 official languages. Function in it daily, in every aspect, also communicating with citizens and so on. The question you must ask yourself, do our politicians and functionaries do that? Do you see on a regular basis ministers using 3 official languages when addressing the public, etc., etc.? So that is the model for inclusivity that we should follow in the country. Unfortunately, it seems to me that our state has chosen English as the medium of inclusivity. And we see that particularly happening at universities, where other languages have been removed, and the argument is always, no, we need to have inclusivity. So for the deaf, this is very important. It might be easier or more difficult with sign language. We have at least the news on a regular basis with sign language interpreters. There you have inclusivity in motion. But key to this whole thing is the education sector. Our Schools Act in 96 already made sign language, as I said, an official language in schools, but government saw it as official language in schools for the deaf. So we have a syllabus, home language, in sign language, but it is primarily implemented in the schools for the deaf. We don't have sign language as a first or additional language. In fact, we have foreign languages like Mandarin, Swahili as second additional languages in schools. And that's where inclusivity starts. That's when you learn the other person's language, and where we should create in this country the culture of inclusivity through multilingualism. In other words, at school, we all should learn more than one language as part of our drive towards inclusivity. That's the one aspect. Key is education. You mentioned another key one, and that is the question of language services. If we don't have language services, even in the spoken languages, you are not going to progress. I take an example, give you a good example. If you go to the Jerusalem municipality, you can choose the language in which you are serviced, including sign language. There's a desk where you can report, and you will get somebody that can do the service for you in sign language or through an interpreter. That is the kind of professional language service that we would require for sign language, but actually for all our official languages. And unfortunately, we haven't put all of these things in place. Hopefully, by including sign language, which is now a huge challenge, things might now get into motion.
Yes, but Prof, let's just maybe take it away from government a little bit and just look at a social level. So if you see a group of people wat Afrikaans sprekend is, en ek is eerste taal Afrikaans of derde taal Afrikaans, and maybe another black person or any other ethnic group who's not Afrikaans speaking would feel excluded. So at a social level, I think that's where perhaps the opportunity is, if it's not already happening. We know in cosmopolitan area, metropolis areas, that generally, because of the nature of how we integrate it, that even with sign language, we should make it our business, if somebody from the deaf community is in that particular conversation, that we inherently accommodate them as well and start inculcating the culture of inclusivity and not just looking at government.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you, and but we should also not be totally hyper about this. South Africans are so multilingual that you would seldom find yourself. Sign language is a bit exceptional, but you would seldom find yourself in a community where people do not know at least some combined languages, where I don't know one, somebody else would know one. So you don't need to be oversensitive about this whole being excluded and so on. So Africans are a bit crazy about that. But with sign language, you know, several universities have been teaching sign language as a undergrad qualification, even postgrad. So there are already really a good number of students going around that know the language. And this is why I said schools are an important thing. What we need to see now is that schools start, all schools, not only schools for the deaf, start teaching sign language as an additional language in schools, promoting the language in that way. And obviously, if we know the language better, we can promote inclusivity and in that way. So you at social level, it can be done, and it should actually be done easier than what it requires government to do.
All right, just very briefly, before we let you go, Prof, are you saying that the focus on other foreign languages, Mandarin, French, or any other that are globally recognized, that sign language should perhaps be given the priority in terms of the I suppose, hierarchy of where it's stacked up in the official languages?
Well, look, the thing is, it's now a national official language, but I mean, it's been in schools already an official language since '96. But the point is, an official language, the other 11, they are all taught in schools as home languages, additional languages, second additional languages, and in all schools. And what we now need to do, and what we want to see, is for sign language to be treated exactly the same way. So don't lock sign language up in deaf schools. That has been the problem up to here.
I hear you.
Referring to social inclusivity, that's where it starts. So don't do that. Bring it now into
the mainstream. I've got you. Thank you very much, Prof. Hate to interrupt you, but thank you indeed for your insight. That's Professor Theodorus du Plessis from the Department of the South African Sign Language and Deaf Studies at the University of the Free State, saying that not to isolate and have specialized deaf schools per se, but to include it into the mainstream education system. And coming up in